When was the last time that you thought about demographics? Probably never. But what if I told you they're one of the biggest forces shaping our future? Things like falling birth rates, aging population, governments literally paying people to have babies. Like, it all is part of demographic changes. And in this final installment of Tempo's Temperature Check, we've got Zoe from Tempo, who takes us through this global baby bust that we're seeing. Why is it happening, what it means for governments, and how it can affect your investments. So this was one of those chats that really got me thinking differently about the future. So it's a bit of a ride, but stick with it. It's way more fascinating than you'd think a chat about birth rates could ever be.
What we've been doing the last few times we've been speaking to you has been really insightful for me, Zoe. We've spoken about Trump and his just general influence on the
stock market.
We've spoken about AI and the impact, or like, have we seen the boom? Is the boom still coming? Like, love talking about that. And today, which I'm not convinced on, but apparently it's going to be interesting. She's like, oh no, is demographics. I mean, I think I'm into it. Because when you did a little teaser for us and you said we're going to be speaking about like the idea of women having less babies and stuff, I was like, cool. I don't understand how the wider demographics is a theme, but I'm really excited to hear more.
Sophie's a big believer in less people on the planet. So we're going to have a little debate, I reckon, on our hands.
Well, to be honest, I don't know enough to know like really about the stats and what's happening. So I'm definitely not in like camp, everyone needs to have 5,000 babies, but I also don't understand the link between necessarily that and the stock market. So that's what I'm really keen to hear more about.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do I actually mean when I say demographics? So to your point, Soph, like 20, 30 years ago, everyone was worried about the world becoming overpopulated. We were going to have too many people, particularly, all of these babies being born out of China. Then we had a one-child policy come in China, and that's really basically seeing their populations peaked, essentially. So their population size is now shrinking. Don't have to worry about quite so many people in the global economy because you're seeing that elsewhere as well. So what you're actually seeing is that for most developed countries, like basically 2/3 of the world, their country's populations are now shrinking.
That is so interesting. 2/3.
Yeah. The only countries you're seeing where women are having enough babies to replace the current population is Africa.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is so fascinating.
And I think there is so much to unpack in terms of what has fueled that. Things from women having capacity to have 5 children, like women just are way more focused on careers and therefore not wanting to have 5, 6, 7 children. Also the cost of having that many children. Also living in more densely populated areas where, having 6 or 7 kids in an apartment versus if you're on a big open field country somewhere. Like there must be so many things playing into that.
Yeah, and it's got to the point where there are actually countries, like Korea, China, places have actually tried paying people to have children. So it's basically you get a baby bonus every time you have a child.
I remember we spoke about this and I was like, this can't be true.
Yeah, it really, really is. And, countries trying to up their free childcare hours, just trying to create more family-friendly policies to try to encourage this. But it hasn't worked.
Yeah.
I reckon women have just clocked onto the idea that for a long time we've just purely been told like we are breeders and that is your job. And all of a sudden people have a taste of like they can choose now if they want to have kids or not. And yeah, I find the whole thing so fascinating because on the one side I'm absolutely like want nothing more than to be able to be a mum one day. I'd love to have a kid. But I really find this like the sacrifice of like, because everyone's like, oh, you can have everything. I'm like, I just don't know if that's possible. Like seeing my friends who have kids and how just much, I cannot even fathom the idea of doing the job that I'm currently doing and having kids. And I think that there's just a lot of women who are starting to realize they can choose. Do you know what I mean? Like there's varying ways that you can structure your life. It's so interesting to me that that's a global trend and not just something that we're seeing in certain parts of the world because, I don't know, I would have thought it'd be more congregated to like super Western society that's like, I don't know.
I think it's just we've grown up in a world that has had it one way for so long, and now women are like, we want to have it all, but the world hasn't caught up in terms of supportive childcare policies,
That's your point.
supportive, workplace, government level, whatever. So saying, hey, here's $1,000 to encourage you to have a child. It's like, no, it's all the other things around in my world that need to catch up, not just a little cash injection.
Yeah. And I think it's, it's a societal shift, right, over time as well towards smaller families, for example. So, people might still have kids, but they might choose to only have one for whatever reason. And then you're only replacing one of you as a couple. And so therefore, fast forward 50, 60 years down the track and there's only one where there were two.
And so what is the problem of that?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Stunning question.
Like a shrinking population. So what is bad about that?
It depends. It doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing, but it does mean that some things about the way we've kind of funded our systems might need to change over time. And when I say that, what I mean is things like, for example, most governments are set up to tax people on their earnings, right? So most of the revenue that governments get to spend money on is coming from you paying tax when you do your job. If there are fewer people doing jobs and more people retired, the balance of that gets out of whack. And government's trying to pay for healthcare, trying to help support those people in old age, but there aren't so many younger people paying taxes anymore. And one way governments are solving that is actually through immigration, which is interesting, going back to the Trump conversation, I guess, about, where that's heading, is that typically, and we've seen this in, countries like New Zealand, countries like the UK, is that immigrants tend to be concentrated in younger age cohorts. You don't get as many people who suddenly up their lives and move countries in their 50s or 60s as you do in their 20s or 30s.
How does that all connect? Sorry if I'm missing something. I'm not totally following.
So if you've got an aging population, so you've got more baby boomers, for example, they're not working. They're getting paid a pension. They're retired. To fund that money, you need to tax the younger people. But if there's less younger people and more older people, then these people need to be taxed a lot more to compensate for so if you don't have that new blood literally coming through and younger people to make that balance, that's when it gets really thrown out and you just end up having to pay huge taxes when you're young.
Japan's a really good example of this. They've been struggling for years with aging population, and it's getting to the point where there are now schools closing down in districts because there are just no kids and they're getting turned into retirement homes. But if you think about it, going back to the sort of fundamental investing perspective, you think about what that means for companies that are catering towards aged care, for example, or catering towards health and longevity solutions. You think about companies that can provide hearing aids or helping with your eyesight as you get older, cataract replacements, all of that sort of stuff,
Stunning. I've always wanted to invest in cataract replacement.
It sounds so sexy. It's not quite the NVIDIA.
It's always the unsexy companies. Not always. It's most often the unsexy companies that do the best. That's Warren Buffett's strategy. You invest in the unsexy, boring businesses.
I'm just so worried. No one's going to invest if all we're talking about is cataract.
We can make cataract sexy.
Can we? Do a campaign? Yeah. So okay. Also, just prefacing, we're not making fun of people.
Sorry, no.
But so let's just think about that then. So if we zoom out and we think, okay, there is going to be a lot more people that are in the sort of older end of the demographic than younger, because that's the trend that we're seeing.
Yeah.
But we're also seeing people scramble to change that. So whether that's governments paying someone to have a baby, my point is at what point do we realise that this is just a decision and this is what people are wanting to live their life? Or can it be influenced by help with childcare, help with this, help with, I guess what I'm trying to understand is do you have any research that suggests that this is a trend that is going to stay for a long time? Or do we think that this is going to reverse in the next 5-10 years?
The research I've seen is this is a long-term trend. What we've seen is what we talk about sort of in this space is the fertility rate. So basically, how many babies does each woman need to have to replace the current population? And that number's about 2.1. In New Zealand and most other developed countries, it's about 1.5, 1.6. In China, I think it's about as low as 1.1 now. So
This is the average.
Yeah.
To replace the current
population, we
Right.
need to have 2.1 babies per woman. Yeah. And so that's been trending down for decades. So,
And it's not
I don't think a baby payment's going to turn it around. You know, it is a societal shift, but it's very unlikely we're going to see this really turn around.
And it's not like also that it's a quick switch.
No.
Like, even if this payment was so big that every woman went out and had children, you know, that's 9 months. And then you've got like 18 years before they're in the working age. You know, it's a trend that you could see for a long time, even if there was this big windfall of births.
And even in countries like Scandinavia, where they do have pretty progressive, you know, parental leave policies, you know, I think get some sort of payment for up to the first 3 years of their life in some of those countries. It's pretty, you know, pretty supportive, you would think. You're still seeing this declining fertility rate happening.
This is so interesting.
Which makes me think there's so many other elements to it rather than just
Societal.
Yeah.
Yeah, big
Yeah.
shifts. But it has implications for, you know, companies that are exposed to those sectors.
Like we saw a little mini baby boom during COVID. The majority of jobs lost was women. And we saw a baby boom, a mini baby boom.
Oh my God. So this is a long-term trend if women stay in the workforce as much as we think they're going to.
Probably one element to it, but yeah.
Whoa. This is fascinating.
And probably people just had a lot of spare time during COVID as well.
So I'm like, I know this might sound like I'm taking the piss, but I'm just like, this is so interesting. And I've never heard it explained in that way. Do you think that, yeah.
I have a question.
Okay, go for it.
Let's just merge the two, AI and demographics. Do we need more people? Great. If we've got technology doing...
It's genius.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things, right? Like if you think about in Japan, going back to Japan, a prime example, they're probably 20 years ahead of most of the world on this in terms of facing that demographic headwind. They have invested hugely in robotic technology. I mean, you think about a car factory in Japan, what do you picture? All these machine arms coming through, very few people other than kind of a supervisor wandering around just making sure everything is actually working because they've been struggling with this. And that's the way you're seeing a lot of other countries going. So when you look at, for example, robotics investment in China, that's picked up and is picking up quite hugely at the moment. Because they're also facing that labour headwind and labour's getting more expensive in China as well. So there's this tipping point, right, whereas if you've got fewer people being able to fill jobs, there's more competition for actual jobs that really need people. And then you might get machines to do the rest. And, you know, like a mini example of this is what we saw during COVID in New Zealand. So people in the fruit picking industry, for example, were investing in more machinery to help pick fruit because they couldn't get people in, the seasonal workers in, who would usually help out with that job. So replacing people with machines.
So trends would be
Invest in robotics companies.
robotics, maybe aged care, and maybe IVF, fertility.
Healthcare.
Wow, that's so
Japan
cool.
sells more adult diapers and baby diapers.
Sorry?
Japan sells more adult diapers than baby diapers.
Do you know, I heard a terrifying stat the other day that 1 in 5 women are incontinent from childbirth, or something along the lines of like childbirth, there's not enough rehabilitation for us to get our pelvic floor back in action, that so many of us go incontinent, and that's probably where all the nappies are going.
I was thinking more like
the reason not to have a baby.
If anyone's looking for a reason, no, this is the thing. It's like, I find it, and I don't know if it's
A baby robot. Pets that are in.
yes, pets.
Pets, actually, that's what
One
everyone else is
child
doing.
and one pet.
Or no children and
No
pets.
children, pets.
pet.
There's another trend.
Huge.
Yeah, that's actually been a really big trend in the last 5 years.
I'm like, can we do lots of episodes on this? This is so cool.
I reckon if we just sat here for like half an hour, each of us, in silence and just like thought about the world, we'd be able to come up with a few trends.
I don't have time for that right now. However,
And that's boring for listening as well. But you know, like if you seriously sat down and were like, okay, why is that happening? Like if you just, I think you could really kind of get into a bit of a hole of like what the world's going to
and
look
that
like.
kind of comes back to the point of like why the investing club exists, right? Because the things that you see and the opportunities that you might spot are very different. And, you know, like what Zoe shared, obviously you're researching a lot, so you see you're actively looking. But all of us see this stuff all the
And we've
time.
got women all around the world.
Tempo is a brand new investing app available in New Zealand, and we're so excited to be telling you about how it works and how you can use it. So in 2023, Tempo conducted a survey with 1,000 Kiwis, and they found that 27% didn't know where to start when it comes to investing. And that's a lot of people. So the great thing about Tempo is that their goal is to take the guesswork out of investing. So when you sign up, they ask questions like, how do you feel about the idea of your investments going up and down? Because some do more than others. You tell them how much you want to save, and they recommend a mix of their funds for you. It's guided investing. So you're getting investment advice from the experts, which is very, very cool. And because they track your goal progress so they can see actually how you're going, they can also recommend that you change your investments and the mix of how you've invested over time, which is really great. So if you would like to try Tempo, you can get a $10 kickstart into your account. And if you would like to learn more about Tempo, you can head to the link in the podcast show notes.
I am just aware of the time, and I know we've had a lot of questions come in from people. They're like, I want to speak to Zoe. So can I just read out one of them? Let's just do that. Oh, this is a really good one. And it's actually really good because of Tempo, because of people doing it themselves, because of all of the ideas that we're talking about with trends that make it feel like you need to make decisions, whether it be buying or selling your investments. So, okay, when I see headlines about the economy plummeting or whatever other dire news that I see, how do I decipher between the headlines I should pay attention to and make decisions on and the ones that I should ignore and pretend that I didn't read in the first place?
Good question. Yeah. A great question. Love the readers' questions. These are awesome. I would say 95 to 99% of it, if you're investing for 7 to 10 years, say, you should probably ignore.
Oh, that's good. I love how to the point it is.
It's so hard, though.
But it's really hard because we're emotional and you see those headlines and we're human and you want to do something because it makes you feel more in control.
Especially if you have investments.
Yeah. It's like, I
those
need to
companies.
take action.
And you see NVIDIA profit cut 50%. You're like, so, oh well, that's fine. You know, and it's like, or NVIDIA's share price, worst day ever. And it's like, it's fine, no worries. Meanwhile, you're like, yeah. It is hard. It is hard. But
Yeah.
yeah, money is emotional. Investing is emotional. So the more that you can remove that emotion completely, the easier it'll be. And it's still something that I struggle with.
And look, I think the other element to that is that a lot of what markets to react to is not actually the number. So say, you know, you're expecting profit growth from a company of 10% and it comes in at 8%. It's like company X disappoints market, you know, analysts downbeat, you know, something like that. And actually you've still made 8% profit year on year. That's still like a solid number if you're looking at the fundamentals. But markets tend to respond to expectations. So it's all about where the expectation is versus reality. But if you think about 8% year on year growth for the next 10 years, you know, the news headlines kind of are sensationalized as well, I would say.
And that's like the really good point with AI is that expectations are off the charts. So if anything comes in even like mildly below expectations, which is so high, that could have a really big impact negatively, but it's still really good growth. You know, it's like that when things get away on themselves or get too far ahead or everyone gets too excited.
I mean, that's what happened with DeepSeek, right? Was before anyone even had a chance to actually analyze the implications of the model, model adding competition to the market. Markets went, oh, they did it cheaper and faster and it's a Chinese company that's come in and that's going to threaten US dominance. Sell. You know, there's kind of a knee-jerk reaction and you've seen that being corrected, right, in the share price of a lot of those companies in subsequent way.
And I know this isn't what we should be encouraging people to do, but I was so proud of myself that I actually went shopping when it was on sale.
But that's what you guys try.
I know that's naughty. Like I know that's not what I do.
It's
It's not what I do with all my money. It's just a small amount because it makes me feel like when I feel involved in what's happening in the world. And I think that sometimes when it comes to trends or news headlines, it's like, well, what's the point in being informed if I'm not going to be doing anything about it? But it's like, actually, there's a way of feeling involved while not risking or being super risky with your money.
So if that says, it's actually exactly what we also do at a top-down level when we're talking about, you know, do we tilt towards New Zealand or do we tilt towards the US? One of the factors that comes into play is whether in simple terms, whether or not that market is on sale or not, whether or not for various factors, the price on that is low relative to where you think your earnings growth is going to come in.
Like if you looked at New Zealand, the New Zealand stock market versus the US stock market over the last 2 years, it's done terribly. So you're like, oh, okay, well, New Zealand's stock market then looks cheap relative to the US. So let's buy some New Zealand. If you were just looking at the historic performance, but yeah.
So your on sale thinking isn't wrong.
Yes, thank you. I really feel like I needed that. I'm like so in the, when you just can tell you need a bit of like
Validation.
Thank you.
But you've also got to make sure what you're buying you're going to wear and it's good quality.
That is so cool. I love that.
You're investing in quality that's going to last
You're
for
not
years.
just going shopping to like the bargain bin of Zara. Like fast fashion. Are you going to wear it forever? Is the investment.
That's a deal.
That's the coolest thing I've heard in ages. I love that. Thank you.
You think by this time we would have heard like all the analogies, all the, but we haven't.
We haven't.
No.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us for our Tempo temperature check.
These are essentially conversations to help you understand what's going on in the market and really hone in on a specific topic.
We hope you enjoyed it, and please let us know what you thought about the episodes by commenting wherever you're listening.